What's the most out-of-touch thing you heard from rich people? Living outside Jackson Hole. This sister of a friend told me how hard it is to live there. You have to fly in your help, cleaning, yard work, from Salt Lake. I had no words. None of the help can afford to live in Jackson Hole. Since the collapse of that highway, many of them will have a 3-hour commute. I think I just figured out why in bygone ages it was common to include room and board in a servant's wages. I was the help flown into Jackson Hole for a year. It was one of the best times of my life. There's an excellent book called Billionaire Wilderness by Justin Farrell about this. Best part of the book is him describing how the wealthy think their literal servants are friends. And the serving class is like, I really want to say f these people, but they pay me to barely survive. No, we aren't friends, lol. A coworker asked me what bank I used for my safe deposit box. I said I didn't have a safe deposit box. She said, but where do you keep your jewels then? Edit, I said I didn't have any jewels, and she just said, huh, and changed the subject. I actually get the sentiment. If I owned anything expensive, I would probably also have a safe place for it. But something about it made her sound like a Disney villain, even though she was a very nice person. It's a very vivid random memory. Thanks, OP. While working for a valet parking service in the Santa Barbara area years ago, a woman hired us for a jewelry showing she was having at her giant house in Montecito. And while we were waiting for guests to arrive, my boss informed me that when the guests get in their cars to leave, that I needed to be sure to close their car doors, or else they would just drive off with their doors open, as they're so used to people closing their car doors for them. I needed a bicycle to get to a new job. Found someone online selling a really nice bike for cheap, so got in touch. Took 2 trains to their house to buy the bike, and when I got there, it was a mansion. The bike was in a garage full of supercars and classics. They asked me where my truck was to load the bike on. When I told them I was riding the bike home, they laughed, and before I knew it, everyone in the house had been called to the garage to hear how I was riding the bike 3 hours home in the dark. No one offered me a lift. They just acted blessed at how they didn't have to do such things. Feel this. Even from not as rich people, I have still been asked why I don't take the car instead of public transport when I buy used stuff. Or, once when I picked up a lamp for free, the woman asked me why I didn't just buy it as it wasn't expensive. Like, what did she expect me to answer? Start sharing my whole story of how I just moved to a place on my own and don't have parents who can help buy stuff for me? If someone spends time on picking stuff up or buying used stuff without a car, it's probably not for fun. When they tell me I should just take off and go somewhere for a week. Even if I made the money, I'd be eating the time itself from the no PTO I get. I've told this before, but my boss was trying to stop me from taking 1 or 2 days off at a time because their accountant was complaining about the extra work or whatever. I explained I was using the days to take a Saturday and Sunday off here and there to visit my family for birthdays or whatever. She responded, "Wouldn't you rather take a whole week off so you can fly somewhere warm?" I just stared at her and said, "I make minimum wage. How am I supposed to pay for that?" She had no answer. Was the accountant working extra to cover for you when you were gone? Or was it the fact they had to adjust your payroll to account for the time off? If it was the latter, sounds like a shitty accountant. I was talking to the owner of the building my old work clinic was in. He was taking his wife back to Germany on vacation for the 3rd or 4th time that year. I mentioned how jealous I was. He told me that the only way I was going to go was to just do it. He said that too many people wait for the right timing and don't just take themselves traveling. I was making approximately $55,000 per year at the time, the single earner for a family of 3 with a toddler. Rent was about 40% of my income. Back when I was in my early 20s, my beat-up old car broke down in my job's parking lot when I was about to drive home. I was getting paid $10 an hour as a pastry chef at a catering company. This was barely enough to cover my rent. I was obviously pretty distraught over my car dying. My boss, company owner, ended up saying to me, "Why are you so upset? It's just a car. Just buy another one?" I couldn't even respond. I just looked at her like she was crazy. These people have to know how much they are paying, though. They think it's a fair wage because they don't have to think about what things actually cost. When I first started making good money, I really didn't keep track of what things cost at the grocery store. I was mostly just grabbing what I wanted to eat that week. I'm a little more frugal now and check the sales somewhat regularly. They have often been separated from financial anxiety, long enough to lose their bearing on the cost of things versus salary. I had a boss once who was almost zealous about the need for everyone to be at work whenever a snowstorm hit. He kinda saw it as the key battle in a war over productivity. I had to pull him aside after he told an intern working half-time for basically minimum wage that she should simply buy a car that can get through the snow, so she can be at work in any weather event. Said it in front of the entire staff and looked like a moron for doing so. Once you accumulate some wealth, not even a lot, just enough to push the wolf away from the door for good, you just don't think about things like, what if my car broke down tomorrow? Life's day-to-day problems just kind of become less consequential, and you can focus your energy elsewhere. Problem? Make it go away with a little money. Most people are extraordinarily myopic. That's how they would deal with the problem. Why shouldn't that work for everyone else? How could your family accountant let that happen? When talking about how growing up, we couldn't pay the bills and had our water, electricity shut off multiple times. My boss at the time made between 5 to 10 times more than I did. We were talking about big purchases like a car or house, and he says something along the lines of, well, you'll get a great deal since you'd all cash purchaser. I just kind of smile and nod, knowing that, on my salary that he was aware of, I was not even an all-cash purchaser of groceries. Man, I get office politics, but there is nothing on earth that could have prevented me from calling him out on that. Yeah, I would have to have them explain that to me. It would literally bug me not knowing how they came to that conclusion. Good excuse to push for a raise. Paying cash on my salary? LOL, good one. My first office job paid approximately $25,000 per year. Like 10 years ago, not in the 50s or something. They had a silent auction for charity where everything started at like $500 plus. I looked at it and was like, if they want us to donate that much, maybe they should pay us enough to be able to afford it. Told my super rich boss my car was finito and I had to buy a new, used one. He replied that he too was having car problems. The roof on his convertible wasn't opening, his third car. I work for a startup based out of San Francisco. I'm a remote employee halfway across the country, and am therefore a sort of second-class citizen. My direct peers who work in SF make at least double what I do, and they almost all had extremely privileged upbringings. They went to top 10 business schools, they summer in Tahoe, that kind of thing. I was in the home office a few months ago for our annual kickoff meeting, and one of the speakers polled the room. Has anyone here worked at Amazon? Nobody raised their hand. Wow, I'm surprised. I said, does warehouse count? And the entire room erupted in laughter, for certainly I just told a very enjoyable joke. If you can't afford childcare, just hire a nanny. We love ours. I hear this kind of thing so often on Reddit, it's mind-blowing. Just hire a nanny. Just hire a doula. Oh, and make sure to hire a backup just in case. Just hire a night nanny a couple nights a week. Like, yeah, you're right, this parenting thing would be way easier if I could just hire a series of people to do it for me. Granted, at least one of them elaborated they weren't from the US, and anyone in their country rich enough to own a computer had hired help. But that's mind-blowing in its own way. To be fair, in a lot of areas, it is literally cheaper to hire a full-time au pair, $20,000 a year, though you have to own a home and have a room to spare, than to send 2 kids to daycare full-time, $15,000 plus each. Yes, really. It's genuinely unbelievable how much childcare costs have gone up in the last 5 years. Daycare used to be the budget option for working families that didn't have grandparents, aunts, etc. to help. Now it's more expensive than the rich people option, and people wonder why the birth rate is so low. Edit. Forgot to mention the other consequence of this. For families where daycare is more expensive than mom's wage, mom usually ends up having to be a SAHM, which has consequences down the line for the types of jobs she can get when trying to rejoin the workforce, and overall has a very detrimental effect on lifetime earnings. It sucks a lot to try and raise a family in America. Why did you take your car to get looked at? Just get a different one. I don't know why you waste your time with repairmen like that. I read a memoir a few years ago that I found incredibly frustrating because the author tried to paint herself as the child of some struggle. The story was framed as talking about the vehicles they owned, and one chapter opened up with her and her father in his new, to him, Porsche going to buy her a Volvo because the vehicle she already owned needed a brake job. Used to travel for a glamping company, Glamour Camping, where we would set up huge canvas tents for fancy weddings and parties. We woke up real early one morning to a bunch of calls from some rich LA socialite about how the tents were wet. No other explanation. We rushed over and it turns out she had no idea what the concept of condensation in the morning was. I can't control nature. Sorry, lady, you're not getting your deposit back. The I wanna, say 12 or 13-year-old son of one of my clients literally expressed confusion to me when I asked them where I could get more paper towels from when they ran out in the washroom of his parents' however many $1 million yacht. He said something like, "It's always there, what do you mean?" He was so disconnected from the process of, I guess, cleaning and restocking that he just thought that stuff would always be there and never run out. LOL, the look of genuine confusion on his face was just something else. That's not the first time I experienced that either. Talking to the kids of extremely wealthy people is always a trip. That doesn't even take that much money. I know people who barely qualify as upper middle class, who have kids so sheltered from the concept of work that they, as teenagers, were amazed at a restaurant where you could see the kitchen. They had never stopped to think how the food for cooked. I was an assistant making just over $50,000 a year, and I heard someone on the board of directors say, "Of course he mayor of a city, stole the money. You can't live on $90,000 a year." There was a guy who recently gave all his money away and lived on the streets to prove that anyone could earn millions. Then his father died and left him millions. He then stopped living on the streets and claimed to have proved his point. There was a similar rich dude that wanted to prove becoming a millionaire is easy, anyone can do it. So he pretended to have $0 with the goal of making $1 million in a year. He ended up quitting, retiring back to his mansion after 10 months due to health reasons. He also only made about $60,000 in those 10 months. TBF. That's a pretty good hustle for 10 months. Edit. I made this comment without know the specifics of his hustle. More I read about, the less impressed I am. The story isn't possible. Like, he couldn't even make it sound plausible writing it. I'm going off memory here, but 1. He was gifted an RV on day 1 of being homeless. 2. He somehow started a coffee bean business with apparently no startup capital. 3. The person who gave him the RV then bought it back for enough that he could get an apartment. So he was still reliant on good credit for business loans, apartment, and his already large social media following for the coffee bean sales gifted RV. And stopping because of medical issues. Like, yeah, if you're eating like a poor person, you're going to have the health of a poor person. But poor people can't go close enough. That was a success. Now I'm not poor and I'll pay for the treatment. We just continue being sick or go into debt or both. Borrow money from your parents and start a business. Borrow a small loan, perhaps $1 million. It's just so easy to just drop $1,000 at Target, you know? My Starbucks co-worker in Calabasas, Kardashian land, after he spent $983 on toys for his 4-year-old nephew's birthday. I don't know why he worked at Starbucks, except maybe his rich family finally forced him to get a job, not understanding why we didn't get more than one gift on our birthdays and Christmas. It was usually clothes. My mom never let us believe in Santa. She always said it was a game people play. Once when I was a little older, I asked why, and she said that before I was born, she taught kindergarten at a school with massive income inequality in Texas. Every single January, all the rich kids would come back from Christmas break bragging about all their presents, and all poor kids would come back crying because they couldn't figure out what they'd done that was horrible enough to put them on Santa's bad list, because he'd skip their house again, just like he did every other year. That changed my entire perspective. Santa is supposed to give presents to good kids and skip bad kids' houses. But if you believe that, then by default, all rich kids are automatically good, and all poor kids are automatically bad. I was a live-in super of a building in Boston. The BLDG was 43 units. 40 were college kids. 1 year, a young girl moved in next to me, and 3 months later, her electricity was shut off. She started pounding on my door, demanding that I turn her electricity back on. I checked her circuit breakers. They were fine. Went into her apartment and immediately noticed the pile of electric company mail on her table, with big red letters, "Last warning, me. You didn't tell the electric company that you were the new tenant. Tenant, what's the difference? Why do they need to know it's me? Me? They need to send you a bill for electricity usage. Tenant, now I know you're messing with me. You don't pay for electricity." She moved out 2 days later of embarrassment, her parents having to pay for breaking the lease. She couldn't look at me for those 2 days. To me, the privilege isn't her being a fucking idiot about electrical bills. It's that her parents paid to break the lease in only 2 days over what is just embarrassment. At a high-end kids' clothing resale store called Once Upon a Child, the store only buys Nike, Adidas, or other well-known brand name kids' clothes, and only kids' clothes. Everything must be new or barely worn, or they won't buy it. Usually when you bring in a bunch of stuff for them to buy, they'll only buy 10% of what you bring in. I once saw them say no to a beautiful custom-made dress that an Indian couple had spent $300 on for their only child daughter. The reason was that it wasn't a brand name. So, at that store, some mom was selling a bunch of clothes and finding out what the store was taking and for how much. Her 8-year-old had wandered off into the store and came back with something she wanted to buy. Mom, no sweetie, we don't shop here. We only come here so poor people have nice things to buy. I love the Dairy Girls, and I asked my husband to watch it with me again because I found it really funny. After watching the first episode with him, he said, "It is funny, but I can't relate to their problems with money and food. Just dip into your trust fund. I do it all the time." Many variations on, why don't the homeless just rent an apartment, share, buy a house? I've known quite a few people to not realize the benefit they received by just getting a house, car, and cost of a degree, sometimes including advanced from their parents. Much easier to budget when those items are removed from the equation. Even more so when you can get some income from the house. A rich person once said to me, "Why don't you just buy a second house for your vacation getaways?" As if owning one house wasn't already a huge financial stretch. Rich friend, just take Friday off work and fly out to visit me this weekend. I know it's last minute, but I'm sure there's seats available. Me, I don't think I can make this weekend. Rich friend, oh yeah, I looked and saw it was only coach available. Don't be embarrassed. I don't blame you for not wanting to sit next to them. Me thinking, does this guy truly think that's why? Lol, I just earn average money. I occasionally drive minibuses for a private school in the UK. Have overheard some very privileged conversations from the students, but one that sticks out is, a tutor on the bus asked a student what he says when other students make comments about the very expensive watches he wears to school, to which he said his response is, "My dad has the same 24 hours as your dad." He then proceeded to go on about how his dad inherited a massive entertainment chain and various hugely successful companies from his grandfather. Company event where people with investment properties told us that you just need to save hard to get that deposit. Just don't go out to dinner with your spouse as much, or just go to the pub every other Friday. Yeah, so reducing restaurant dinners from 0 to 0 and the pub tab from 0 to 0. Still broke. My colleague left the Zoom midway through. If it was in person, he would have broken the door on the way out, or came across the conference table at them. This girl got genuinely angry and offended when people suggested she could take public transportation to the airport instead of paying for a $50 Uber. She posted on social media about it. Edit. The bus they suggested is very convenient and goes directly from our college to the airport, so it's not like she'd have to drag her luggage from bus line to bus line. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and medical costs are insane without insurance. This happened in 2012 when the ACA bill was going through Congress. My boss was against it, and I told him how getting on insurance would help me. He grimaced and said, "That is your responsibility. You should get a job." I worked for him, and he made sure to not provide benefits for the employees. My friend has a charity, and these wealthy folks took him out to dinner to talk about the work he does. When it came down to making a donation of any amount, they were hesitant on whether to give. The bill for dinner came to the table and it was like $1,500, and they just dropped their American Express card like it was no big deal. I was talking to a very rich lady we had just videotaped. She was a board of directors at one of the largest oil companies on the planet. She told me she used to summer in Prague. I told her I used to summer in school. I thought that was a damn funny line, but it didn't even register to her. She was just confused on how that had anything to do with what she said. Owner of the company I used to work for was a car guy. His daily driver was a giant, fully kitted out Chevy Tahoe that he rarely drove more than just himself in. And he also owned a Ferrari, 1 or 2 Mercedes, and a Jaguar, I think. Specific models, I don't know. I just know they were pricey. One day after I'd worked there for a couple years, he came to our office in NorCal and tossed me the fob to his Tahoe and said, "I need you to drive this down to Paso Robles, our office on the Central Coast, about a 5-hour drive where he is based out of." When I asked how I would get home, he said he would make sure I get taken care of. When I asked how he would get back home, he said, "My Ferrari that I'm picking up from the shop." Later in the day, I asked him to show me where his windshield wiper controls were since rain was expected during my drive. He said it's all automatic, and when I asked how that works, he goes, "How old is your car?" Very nice guy that gave out generous bonuses every year, but he was pretty out of touch with us normies. Thank you for watching. Write comments, put likes. Do not forget to watch other videos.